What's going on, guys? As you guys know, my side hustle of choice is to buy, work on, fix, and sell old outboard boats and boat motors. I've been getting some comments on a lot of you guys starting to get inspired and maybe get into it, make yourself a little extra cash, what have you, just something fun to tinker on, doesn't matter. With that being said, I thought it might be cool to give you guys a little bit more of an inside view on how I find some of these old boats and boat motors, and also some of the really common problems and how to work through them and fix them on these old engines. Without any further delay, let's talk about how I find these deals on these old boat motors. Guys, 99% of my motors come from the same exact place, and that place is the wonderful land of Facebook Marketplace. Guys, Facebook Marketplace is an absolute jungle. It's mayhem, it's chaos. But let me tell you what, you spend enough time on there, there is so much money to be made. Guys, if you didn't know, I am up in Ohio, so I know the Ohio market really well. I know what these motors sell for, when I'm getting a good deal, when it's a horrible deal. You need to learn your local market. I can't really help you know what's a good deal in your state. Best thing to do is just hop on Marketplace, start scrolling, start learning. If something's been for sale for 3 months and it's still not sold, it's probably priced too high. Learn your local market, learn what things are selling for, and then you will be able to identify a good deal just like that. Alright guys, we found a crazy good deal for only $150. Let's go get it. I'm on my way there right now. That is step one of the process, is to find a deal and get over there as quick as you can. Yeah, boy. Most important thing you need to know about this business is always be open to opportunities, no matter where you're at. I actually had no idea who those guys were, but they said it wasn't for sale. But you know, I never would have known that without asking. We got the motor back home. We ended up making a deal with the seller for $150. As you can see, this cowling is in rough shape, looking pretty bad. For obvious reasons, guys, I did not record any of my interaction with the seller. However, I'm going to take you through step by step exactly what I checked and what I looked for before I purchased this motor to make sure that I didn't get screwed and buy a big junker. The first thing always that you want to do is give this flywheel a turn. You want to make sure that the motor is not locked up. If this flywheel won't turn 360 degrees, that means something inside the actual engine block itself is either rusted, broken. It never means anything good if you can't spin this around in a circle. The second most important thing to look for on any outboard is that it's shifting properly. In the lower unit, you have what's called your lower unit gear case. There's a bunch of metal gears in there that is essentially the transmission of the engine. When you're in neutral, the prop should spin freely. The next thing you're going to want to do is you want to put this outboard into forward gear. When the outboard's in gear, either forward or reverse, you should not be able to spin the prop freely like you could in neutral. So this is good, forward gear is working. Then we put it back to neutral, spins freely. Then we check reverse. Same thing. We know two things about this motor now. The engine is not locked up, and also it has a good lower unit that's shifting properly. Those are by far the two things that are gonna cost you the most money and basically means your outboard is screwed if you don't check those, so definitely check those before you buy it. Alright guys, the next most important thing to check on any outboard you're buying is the compression. Obviously, internal combustion engines make explosions, and that's what turns the shaft and turns the propeller and scoots your boat across the lake. It can't make explosions inside the cylinder if there's anywhere that the pressure is leaking out. So we need to check the compression in each cylinder and make sure that those numbers are good. The way we check compression is with a compression gauge. This is one of those tools that is absolutely 100% necessary. We want to remove both of these black rubber spark plug boots from the spark plugs themselves. One at a time, we're going to remove these spark plugs and just thread the compression gauge straight into where the spark plugs were at. Alright, all that's left to do is crank on the rope start 5 to 8 times and then come check what our number is. And we are sitting right at 75 psi. Now you just repeat the process with the bottom cylinder. And a perfect 75 on the bottom as well. Every motor is going to have a different number as to what's good and acceptable. The main thing you want to check for when you do a compression test, guys, is not the numbers itself of whether they're too high or too low. The main concern is that the cylinders are very close to being even with each other. The next thing I always check is going to be the spark of the engine. So let's talk about what all internal combustion engines need to run properly. You need compression, spark, and fuel. We've got compression, that's great. Now we want to know if we have spark. My preferred way to check the spark on an outboard is a spark tester. The boot hooks up to the spark plug, and this end hooks up to the actual wire coming off of the ignition coil. And there's a little light bulb in here. If we're getting current and spark from the ignition coil to the plug, this will flash and light up and give us a visual indication that we have good spark on that cylinder. All right, time to check if we have any spark on the top cylinder. All right, we got good spark on the top cylinder. That's great news. Now we're just gonna pull our tester off and try it again on the bottom. All right, guys, this is freaking awesome. We have great spark on both cylinders and good compression. This is gonna be a really good running motor. So we said earlier, we need compression, spark, and fuel to have a good running engine. We have compression and we have spark. All that leaves is fuel. So next thing we're gonna do is hook gas up to this thing. So now I'm gonna pump this primer bulb and I'm going to check for leaks. And we have a leak. These are some of the most common parts to break on these old outboards are the fuel pumps. So lucky for me, I do have a spare that I already have in the garage, so we can go ahead and pop that on. Could not be an easier job, guys. It's literally just 2 bolts. You just pop it out, cut the hose clamps off the fuel lines, and put the fuel lines back on the new pump exactly how you took it off. Literally all you need is a flathead screwdriver. Okay, I swapped out the old fuel pump for the new one, and as you can see, we are squeezing the primer bulb firm and we are leak free. These outboard motors aren't like cars where you've got antifreeze to cool the motor. They're actually cooled by the water in the lake, so you can never run an outboard outside of water. Always make sure you've got water. Now typically there will be a side water intake here, and if you have that, you can use those outboard motor muffs with the hose. But if you've got an old style intake like this one, you've got to fill up a tub. All right, guys, the tank's full. The only thing left to do is fire this motor up and see how she runs. All right, first big thing I noticed. These ignition coils are well on their way to being completely shot. We've got a huge crack in the side of this one, and this one looks like it's melted down far enough to where leaves and other debris have been sticking in it. Guys, just because you have spark on the spark tester does not guarantee that you have a strong enough spark to ignite the motor. We're gonna replace the plugs anyways, and I'm just not gonna sell a motor with ignition coils in that bad a shape, so it all needs done anyways. And if that doesn't solve the issue, that's okay, because it needed them. So first thing we're gonna do here to try and identify why this motor won't start is we're gonna go ahead and put 2 brand new marine spark plugs in here. Okay, we got 2 brand new spark plugs screwed in. Next thing we're gonna do to try and address this issue is we're gonna get rid of these old melted horrible ignition coils and put in 2 shiny new ones. Look at this, guys. An ignition coil is not supposed to look like this. Got an old rusted bobby pin, a bunch of debris that has just melted into the coil. These definitely need replaced. All right, we've put our brand new ignition coils on the motor. Let's go ahead and try and fire it up and see if we notice a difference.
A few moments later.
Nothing. All right, at this point, I'm very confident spark is not our issue. Now time for the biggest culprit, the carburetor. As far as not running correctly goes, the carburetor is responsible probably 85 to 90% of the time. This little guy basically takes in fuel through the external gas tank and mixes it with air, makes it into a mist, and shoots it into the cylinder in order to be ignited and run the engine. In order for the gasoline to be turned into a mist that's able to be ignited, it's got to shoot through a couple really small jets inside the carburetor. It's super common for them to get clogged with dirt and gunk and varnished gasoline, all sorts of fun stuff. So 85% of the time, if your outboard's not running right and you clean the carburetor, it's probably gonna solve the issue. So that's what we're gonna do. Taking this off isn't too bad. It's just two 7/16 nuts on each side there holding it in. The only real challenge here is getting a wrench on that other nut. You gotta get around the starter and all that nonsense. 9/16 on top or a crescent wrench, whatever you got, and let's pop that bolt out. It's very important when you move this, you don't go touching it and playing with it too much, because these things are a big pain in the butt to rewind and get back, so let's not touch it too much. Now we can reach this other nut on the carburetor, so let's take that off and yank the carburetor out. All right, that took about 2 minutes, so the only other things you had to take off is just one fuel line and then a couple smaller fuel lines for the choke and the primer. First thing I'm gonna do is take the bowl off and see how much debris is in there. And the first look, a little bit of dirt for sure. You can maybe see the specks of dirt that are just kind of littered around. That's all this thing needs to get jammed up and not work right. All right, I removed the float and needle. Those appear to be in decent shape, but we're gonna move on. Next, we're gonna take out the low speed idle adjustment needle, see what's going on in there. The needle looks okay. It's not dented or scarred or anything like that, so we're gonna move on from there. Next, I'm gonna grab the Phillips again and take this top cover off. Here we have a bunch more little orifices for fuel flow and all that stuff. Gasket's okay. Next, I'm gonna pop off this other jet. It's not clogged. All right, so now we have the carburetor kind of tore down into its bare form. I'm gonna take a can of carburetor cleaner and I'm just going to shoot it through every single hole, jet, and orifice on this entire thing, as well as on these pieces here. Make sure whenever you're using this stuff to blast a carburetor, make sure you always have safety glasses on, because there's so many little jets, and when you put your straw inside one and you shoot this carb cleaner, you really don't ever know where it's going to come out at, and you can very easily get blasted in the eyes. I've done it. It does not feel good, so just put some glasses on. Okay, at this point I've sprayed out every jet, every orifice. Now I can go ahead and begin to reassemble. Another thing you gotta check, guys, is how level this float is. I'm not sure if you can tell on cam, but it is not exactly sitting level in there. It needs to be a little lower and leaning a little more left. This is looking much better. Got a fuel tank hooked up here. Before I go through all the trouble of filling a water tank, I am just gonna see if I can get this thing to pop and run for a second, and then I'm gonna kill it. Let's see what we got. Much better. Sounds like she wants to run, so we're gonna fill a tank. We started off by making sure we put new ignition coils on, making sure we had good spark. We cleaned the carburetor, replaced a couple O-rings, stuff like that. Knowing we've got a good carburetor, the next step is really this screw right here. This is essentially our low speed idle jet mixture screw. This determines the ratio of fuel to air that's in our gas mixture. We're basically gonna be turning this little screw in and out a quarter turn at a time until we find the perfect sweet spot where this engine wants to fire up and idle. We also have not had this engine running yet to know if it pumps water or not, so that'll be good to find out as well. Now that's what we like to call getting somewhere. That's where the water comes out, and there's not an actual hose leading from there to the telltale like there's supposed to be. There was a little bit of water coming out, but not nearly as much as there should have been. So we are going to do an impeller job on this motor. While we're waiting on our impeller to be delivered tomorrow, next step we got to do to this thing is make it look good, because it looks horrible. Like, what the heck is that? Oh, and there's a big crack in it too. Come on now. Goes without saying, best thing is to just get a new cowling. However, I'm gonna try and patch it up best I can. With that being said, gonna use some standard JB plastic weld. Says it's perfectly suitable for fiberglass, plastic, anything in between. So we're gonna give this a try, then we're gonna sand the whole thing down and give it a nice paint job with new decals. You know, guys, I'm just sitting here on my garage floor waiting for this JB weld to cure, and I see them talking about the world's strongest bond. It's interesting because the world's strongest bond is actually me and my subscribers. If you're not a sub, that's cool, but be pretty cool if you were.
Huh?
This is a really sad day. I dropped a part and reached to grab it and accidentally bumped and knocked over my motor stand, and unfortunately my freshly painted cowling, the one that I stayed up late to repair cracks on, gone. I got a guy about 45 minutes away that sells cowlings like this. I should be able to get into one fairly cheap. It was a highly unfortunate end for this cowling. However, I was able to source a new one. Found this guy right here, and this should fit perfectly. As you can see, I just pulled all the stickers off of our new replacement cowling. I think it might look okay if we just paint this a light shade of gray. Gonna go ahead and pop this lower unit off and install our new impeller. It's actually in pretty darn good shape. Went ahead and put on a new impeller anyways, just cause why not, never hurts. Since our impeller was in pretty good shape, I'm also gonna put a brand new thermostat up here in the thermostat housing. They're really cheap, just gonna pop a new one in real quick. New thermostat going in. Okay, our new thermostat's in, let's go ahead and fire it up. We have a new thermostat, a new impeller. It's pumping lots of water out this main Telltale exhaust. However, our actual Telltale stream is a very light dribble. Basically, once the water gets pumped up by the impeller, it passes through the thermostat, and this is what regulates the operating temperature of the motor. Once the engine gets hot enough, the thermostat's gonna open up, and basically what this does, it allows water to pass through the cylinders as well as through a series of channels all around the sides of the cylinder walls. We call those the water jackets. You can suck up a lot of dirt and sand and debris and rocks through the impeller. It goes up into the cooling system and it clogs the water jackets. It's not hard, it's just a huge pain because you have to pull the entire power head in order to get it off. The motor's running great, it's looking great. At this point, the engine would normally be ready to list on Marketplace and sell for a good profit. However, I cannot in good faith sell this to someone else knowing that there is some debris deep down stuck in the water jackets. For the 99% of flips you're ever going to encounter along fresh water, this video pretty much has it all covered, and it's already getting long. With that being said, let me know if you guys have any interest in watching me pull this power head and clean these water jackets out. If you guys would be into that, let me know. We can have a couple beers, hang out in the garage, pull a power head, and see how hideous the inside of this motor is together. Hope you guys enjoyed and were able to learn something from this video. I got a boat I'm working on right now, so stay tuned for that, and I will see you guys soon.